are. And we're super excited today to show you a preview of new security features in 3.1. And we're going to talk about them. We're also going to show you a live demo. And hopefully you're going to see some resemblance between the two, how we talk about it and how the features actually work. Craig and I are part of the team that's been working for almost a year to bring these features. So before I start that, let me show you a demo of a documentary. How is this done in a real world? Yeah. A technical difficulty. All right. So play and then big screen. Yeah. So hopefully we built something better than having a backdoor open, at the end. So, I have no idea. All right. So okay. So sorry about that. So you saw Emil's keynote this morning, and clustering, the new clustering technology and the new security framework are the centerpieces of this new release, Neo4j 3.1. And you may wonder, why did we put so much effort in revamping our security for this release? And the answer is quite simple. The Neo4j as a product is maturing. What you saw before is that our customers were deploying Neo4j database in a single department, and it's being used by a handful of users, maybe one application that was consuming the insights of Neo4j. Let's say a recommendation engine, was a fraud detection, was very narrowly scoped for one department. What we have seen now, we've seen a lot of departments within one company deploying and using Neo4j. And since the power of graphs is that the data is connected, there's no point of them each installing their own Neo4j instance. They're actually having a one Neo4j database being used across departments. And the first question that comes up is then, how do you control access to it? How do you ensure that you're meeting all the enterprise security and compliance requirements set forth? So what we did, you're going to have to click somehow. What we did, in this release is we addressed the needs to be meeting the enterprise security and compliance requirements. So we built a list of features, and I will just walk you through some of them, and I will do a live demo of those. So in the Neo4j 3.0, we only had one user. It was Neo4j, and you could log in via Neo4j user and use the database. We introduced the concept of multiple users in Neo4j 3.1, and we have a flexible choice for you to choose where are these multiple users stored, which service are you using. You can use the federated users like LDAP, and we can talk a lot about, more about that. We introduced the concept of role-based access controls. Roles are traditionally being used in databases to control access to database. It's a standard way, so if you ever used roles in your life, it'll be quite similar in Neo4j. If it's not, it's probably going to be very soon. We could have stopped with just multiple users and roles. This is already quite a big endeavor to take on, but we didn't stop there. We actually wanted to also give administrators a view on what's going on in your system, what are the running queries across the entire cluster, and give ability to individual users to terminate their own queries and for admins to terminate other people's queries. So we natively integrated this feature with security, and we gave different rights to different people according to their roles. And finally, the question I, as a product manager, get asked a lot is, when are you going to have a fine-grained access control? And in this release, we introduce a way for you to actually, via procedures, to achieve a fine-grained access control to your graph. So with that, let's start with the multiple users. So this is the login screen for Neo4j. So before you had to choose Neo4j user, now you can have any user. And really the question is, well, which service you want to be storing and managing, doing user management of your users. We have three options. We built in an internal native users repository. We call them native users. We recommend those for testing, proof of concepts, single instance deployments. I'm really not doing a justice to this feature. We built quite a lot of interesting things such as suspending users, activating users, changing the flag on a user to change their password on the next login, things like that. But the reason I'm calling this as a single instance deployment is because if you are an enterprise customer and you want to install and deploy Neo4j in your enterprise architecture, you already probably have your LDAP and your native your users already defined. So you don't really want to copy those users into Neo4j and then have two different systems managing this. So we understand that there is already an LDAP in your environment. And this is the second option. We built an LDAP connector, which is highly configurable. So you can adapt to your LDAP user structure. And we'll see an example of that. And you can use any LDAP compatible service like Active Directory, Open LDAP. And soon in the next, let's say, very soon, let's say half a year or so, we're going to have a support for Kerberos. If the native users or LDAP connector is not really meeting your requirements, we also built an extensive plugin architecture where you can build and deploy your own custom authentication and authorization components to do that work for you. And you can deploy that in our /lib directory and then load that up. And just yesterday, I heard from one example of that. In financial industry, in some specific parts, in hedge funds, things like that, the users can only see, specific users can only see less than a half of the revenue. So think about that requirement. That cannot be solved with the typical, your traditional roles. If you want to know that you're only showing less than a half of revenue, you need to know what the revenue is, and you need to calculate it dynamically. There's a different use case. Let's say if you have access to this node, the rule says that you can also access the nodes adjacent to them if they are being built after this time or whatever. You cannot do that with roles. You have to build your own graph-specific and use case-specific authorization controls. And then I think this is the power of the graph, where you just don't assume that the traditional role-based will work for you. So we have that option as well. I think it's very, very powerful. Configuring which authentication provider you use is a single-line statement in Neo4j conf. Native users is enabled by default, and it's a single-line statement. It's very easy to use. So let's look at the LDAP case, which is, I believe, 90+% of our enterprise customers will use. So, can I point maybe? Ah, cool. Everything's working out now. So the single statement, DBMS security out provider equals LDAP. This is how you turn on your LDAP connector. The second thing you need to do, you need to provide the endpoint of your LDAP. So you're probably going to have a high availability LDAP deployment. You're going to provide your endpoint here. If you have a non-traditional port, you can specify semicolon port. If you're using SSL, TLS version of LDAP, you can specify LDAP-S, also specify the port 689. Everything works. If you have an LDAP system that has users that are not allowed to read and access their own data, you can use the concept of the system user. And we build the support for that. You can turn on the system user, and you can provide the credentials for the system user. This is also a best practice because you don't want the credential of every single user passing through the network every time you're checking the authorization of that user. So you can just use one read-only account that is being passed over the network. It's a best practice. We built a support for that. And also we provide quite technical here. I'm not going to go into details. Maybe we'll see more on a demo, but certainly tomorrow the training will go a little bit more details. But we provided a quite configurable LDAP connector to adapt to the structure of your user directory, because every deployment is a different structure. So let's look at the example. So let's say your company base DN is example.com. You have two folders, people and groups, organizational units, and people are Bob Smith and Carl Jr., and they are member of one of these groups. So this is Neo4j read-only, Neo4j read-write. So let's say Bob Smith is part of read-only, and Carl Jr. is a part of Neo4j procedures. And they are linked inside your LDAP directory by the attribute member of, whatever, and that's how it works. This says nothing about what these people can do in Neo4j, right? This is just the structure of your Active Directory as such. What you need to do is you need to map these groups to Neo4j permissions. So here we have a single line DBMS security, group to role mapping, and you map read-only, Neo4j read-only to a reader. You map schema manager to architect. You map Neo4j administrator to admin, okay? So now, you're probably wondering, well, what are reader, publisher, architect, admin, all right? So now we're getting into the role-based authorization. So when we built role-based authorization, we thought it would be really nice to provide 4 predefined roles. It's a keyword. They mean something to the Neo4j. So if you're mapping to the reader role, that reader will have ability to terminate their own query and will be able to read the data in Neo4j. But it will not have any other permissions. It will not be able to write or manage indexes or terminate other people's queries or even manage built-in users. Publisher is our read-write role, has ability to read data, but has the ability to also write and delete and update data. Architect has ability to write data, but it has ability to manage index and constraints. So you can create an index, you can create a property existence. As Emil said in his keynote, graphs are not schema-less, they're schema-optional, and we're adding more constructs on schema in the releases to come. And this is where architect role will really come to play. And finally, we have admin, who has all these rights, abilities, or permissions, and has ability to manage built-in users. Okay? I got asked the other day, can you terminate your own query if you are not a reader, publisher, architect, and admin? What do you think? Can you terminate your own query? You could, but you can't do a query. If you don't have a read access to database, you don't have a write access to database, you can't really do much. So I wasn't sure if I should put it on a slide. So with that, we're going to do some live demo and then praise the demo guys that everything works well. Craig, over to you.
Thanks.
Let's do this. This is only available in Enterprise Edition. The reason for this, while we're setting up, let me talk about this. Community Edition has, can you hear me? Yeah. Community Edition has ability to do multiple users, because we believe people should not share their passwords among each other. So if you have a handful of the users doing some demo or POC, they're trying out Neo, they're like, hey, look at this great graph I built. They should not share the passwords. But there's no reason for them to have role-based access control or connected to LDAP if they're using Community Edition and doing some small POC. If they're using Neo in a production, addressing a critical
queries, then they need ability to list the queries, to terminate the queries. They need ability to protect and safeguard access to data. You don't see these concerns in a community edition. There's another question while we're getting,
I think
yeah.
we're ready.
It's a great question. So we can customize, and I'm going to talk this after the demo. So yeah. So I think we could start.
Yeah, let's get started. How do you feel about the font size? Shall I make it a bit bigger? Too small, maybe. How about that? Yeah.
You want to do the outline?
Sorry?
The outline.
All right. Yeah, let's make it a little bit more visible. This is the Neo4j browser. You've all seen this a few times, right? And what you can see right now is pretty much the same as it was in 3.0, 2.3, 2.2 even, user and password. And as before, you have one default user that comes in with admin rights. What we've provided now in the enterprise feature is the ability to manage users and manage permissions in quite a flexible way. I'm going to demonstrate a few different things, starting with the native users Igor mentioned before, which is really targeted mostly at single instance deployments. Then we're going to have a look at what we can do on clusters. So let's start with the native users here. Everything has been implemented with procedures. However, we have got facilities to make this easier for you. I'm going to start by showing you this. I want to create a user with the name Neo, password ABC. And the last field there is an interesting one because if I leave it out, it defaults to true, which requires that the user change their password on login. And everyone's familiar with Neo4j since 2.2, where your built-in user, you have to change the password on login. We have a feature as well now where you can, during your installation process, set that password so you don't have to do it. And in all of our scripts, all of our procedures and user interfaces, whether or not you want that is an optional thing that you can set with this flag. So we can create the user. We can also list the users. If you have a look here, we now have two users, the one that was built in, Neo4j, and of course the new one we've just made, Neo. An important thing to notice here is the roles column. The new user we made has no role. Igor mentioned that we can create users on community. If you create a user on community, they have full rights. But if you create a user on enterprise, you have to assign the rights. And that can be done with a procedure. But I'm not going to show you the procedures because there are better ways of doing it if you're using the browser. So let's move instead to some nice usability features built into the browser, making the browser into a kind of a administration console. Here you can list all the users, and you can see that Neo has no role. So I can make him reader. He is now reader. I can create a new user. I'm not going to require a password change either. I can look at my user list. I see I now have 3 users. I can assign a role. And so on. You can continue to enrich your user management, make as many users as you want. All of this can be done both with procedures, which can also be accessed via the Cypher shell or through scripts, as well as with this user interface, which is convenient. Another feature Igor mentioned as well is the ability to activate and suspend users. If you suspend a user, they will no longer be able to log in. You can also change their passwords here. There's quite a bit of power. And all of this, as I said before, is available through procedures. I'm not going to run those, but I'm going to run one procedure, which I think is very nice to know about, is the procedure called procedures. This one is a very great place to start if you want to know what you can do on the database. Many things related to the database itself and the database management system. Ones I'm going to demo around listing and killing queries, a very nice feature, and in particular, all of these security features. An important point with these security procedures, creating roles, removing roles, adding users, assigning roles to users, suspending users, activating users, all of these are specific to native users. Igor mentioned we also support LDAP, which is targeting toward clusters. With an LDAP server like Active Directory, you should manage your users in Active Directory. So that leads me to the next part of the demo where I'd like to actually show you that. I have here 4 more tabs, all of which are connected to different instances of a cluster. I'm going to log in. The Neo4j user doesn't actually work on this cluster because I am using Active Directory.
Hence the long password.
Yeah, I think, for my local instance, I didn't mind using a really crappy password, but of course on Active Directory, this Active Directory instance is running out in the cloud. And actually, Active Directory doesn't let you type in bad passwords. So I have to type that long thing. So first command, the one that was showed to you in the previous talk, the cluster overview. And as you can see, we have 3 cores and 3 edges. This is similar to the view that they demoed as well with the sysinfo, where you can see those in this table. Very, very convenient. If I tried to list users here, that's not going to work. These procedures that are specific to native users don't even exist in a deployment that is working with Active Directory. So I'm going to log in different users on different instances. That's working fine. On this instance, I'm going to log in a read-only user called Neo. And as expected, if I attempt to do a write operation, it will not succeed. We could have also done this demo on the native users. Everything works exactly the same. And we've got a longer version of the demo where we change permissions on native users and do quite a bit of stuff. What I'm going to show you here now, however, is how would you want to change this users using Active Directory. You, of course, need access to your actual Active Directory server. This is a server running on Amazon at the moment. It's a server that we've been doing a lot of testing against for our testing infrastructure. And if you have a look here, I don't know if the fonts are big enough, but I'm going to expand the properties of the Neo user and look at his group membership. And I see that he belongs to the Neo4j read-only user. And you saw from IGOR's earlier slide that we had mapped that to the reader role. What I'm going to do is give him more rights. Read-write. So he is now assigned to both of those groups. Perfectly legal. It can be multiple groups, multiple roles. It's going to give you the superset of your permissions. If I attempt to create this node, can you guess what's going to happen? Correct. It will fail because if we were to connect to Active Directory to ask whether a user has rights or not, every single time someone executed a query, we'd have a serious performance problem. So when it comes to the federated authentication, we cache the user's rights. The built-in default is 10 minutes. For this deployment, I've made it 1 minute, which means there's a reasonable chance by now that you might have chance. No, not yet. We can wait a little bit longer, or we have a procedure where you can actually flush the credentials cache and force this to happen. Let's give it another try before I try that. Oh, yeah, there we go. Okay, so the minute has expired. He now has the rights to create a node, and of course, we can see that that node really is there. And if I go to another cluster instance, this is now core 2. It's also on the other cluster instance. So everything's synchronized across the cluster as shown in the previous demo. Next thing to do, of course, is to remove that guy's rights because he's my read-only user. I don't really want him to have this capability. And I have the script for clearing an authentication cache. That's just sending the write procedure commands to all of the cluster members, telling them all, clear your caches. This guy will no longer have the ability to create users. So that's all I want to show. Sorry?
To create nodes.
Yeah, to create nodes, sorry. We could carry on and show you a lot more about permissions, but what I'd like to do, since we're short of time, is move on to a very exciting feature that we added recently. Not strictly speaking a security feature, but it's a feature that only really became feasible now that we have security infrastructure. This is the ability for an administrator to manage queries running across the cluster. So if I choose a instance where I've logged in as an administrator, no, neither of that. Let's have a look at this one here. Let's log in as administrator here. There is a procedure called list queries. If I just run that procedure, I'm not getting an especially exciting answer. I'm getting the answer that the query that's running is the query I've just run, right? List queries. What is informative about this is the amount of extra data that you're getting. You can see parameters, in this case none, start time, elapsed time, connection details, metadata. We're going to come back to metadata, but that's a very, very interesting one, so remember that. However, all I'm seeing is what was run on the instance I'm connected to, which is, yeah, interesting. But what an administrator really cares about is looking across the entire cluster. We've built into the browser a really nice little feature, which first of all looks for the cluster overview, finds all of the bolt connection endpoints, and then connects to all of them, runs this list queries on all of them, and then compiles a single table for you. Here is the table of all of the queries running on all of the clusters, which in this case is only the list queries. So let's put in a load of queries. I'm going to generate there we go. Here we go. Now we have a long table of queries running on right across the cluster. If you look at the first column, you're going to see core 1, core 2, core 3, edge 1, edge 1, edge 2, edge 3. As we refresh this page, it's going to change. Yeah, the edges are mostly gone. So some of these queries are not that long running. You see, they're disappearing by themselves. Some of them, however, are too long running, and I, as an administrator, am not very impressed. I'm going to kill them with this button over here. Die. Kill this one here. Die. Oh, there we go. Some of them died by themselves. Here's one that I'm going to die. The queries that I've set up here are designed to run for 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 120 seconds, different lengths, so that some of them are going to terminate by themselves and other ones I'm going to kill. And now they're all gone. Let's just emphasize this by showing you that one more time. Click refresh. There they are again. Have a look at the params and metadata columns. Obviously, you expect the other columns, right? The host, the username that's logged in, the query itself. Params is very useful because you want to know if there's many queries that are the same and you suspect that one is behaving badly because of the parameters, then it's something you can use to look at. I mentioned before metadata. This is now extra specially important, I think, because although in this example, the user column has got all of these users that we've created with different rights, it's actually far more common for people to deploy applications where they only have one database user or maybe just 2 or 3, and then they have 100 application level users that are maintained in the application. Neo4j has no idea about those users. It's an application level user. But the administrator who wants to go in and track down badly behaving queries and manage it, he probably cares about that application level user. We call them the ultimate user. This metadata column is where an application can inject any amount of information at once. In this example, if I hover over it, I've put in a map of 2 key value pairs. You can put in any number of key value pairs, the ultimate user being one example, but you might say which actual application did it. If there's 20 different types of application connecting to the same database, you might want to know that. Region, maybe local IP address. There could be many things that you might want to see here as an administrator. And then you would use that to decide how to administer these things. Talking about administrator, there's another thing that we've added. That's the last thing I'm going to show related to administration. And that are these log files. You've got two log files. One has existed before, the query log, enterprise only, but we've expanded it now to include also the username and the ultimate user in the metadata. So all the information that you can see in that listing is available here, so for post-processing of which queries were run and how long they took. And the other one was the security log, and that's completely new. And here we'll see what security events have occurred. Morpheus failed to log in, typed the wrong password, somebody did log in, Tank tried to do something they were not allowed to do, etc. So this is also very, very good for conformance and post-processing. That's it for the demo.
Thank you.
Let's go back to the presentation.
So I'm short on time as well. There's a last feature. Yeah, perfect. So there was a question on custom roles, and I always get a question on a fine-grained access control. How do you make sure to only allow part of the graph being accessed? So if you have a PII data, if you have social security number, what do you do with it? Like, how do you protect that? So let me show you. This is the same example that Emil used this morning in the keynote. You have, it's not probably the, the best model, but you have a company that has employees, and employees have salaries. You have a different node that has employee salary data, but the employee node has also a property called social security number. So what do we do with that? If you give a person a reader access, it will have access to everything, right? So what you can do, because you have procedures, you could build a procedure called get employee details for a company Acme, and that procedure would only read address and name. Company name, this is where the query would hang on, this is anchor, and it would read also the other employee with the name and address. It would never ever access their data and salary. If you want to read salary, if you have a person in your company that needs to read salary, you would build a different procedure. You would get employee salary data for that particular person. So you could hook on this node, get SSN, and read the salary. So what you need to do, you need to give permission to the user, Bob Smith in accounting, a permission to read salary details, and Carl Jr., because he's junior, in HR to only see the details of the employees without access to the employee data. So how we do that is through annotating user-defined procedures with a permission custom-defined role. So you need to build the procedure that will access your employee data, and you would put allowed equals accounting. By doing that, you just defined a custom role. You just defined a mapping to a custom-defined role, right? You deploy the procedure into Neo4j instance, put it in a lib directory, restart the instance, restart the service on a cluster, and then you create a custom role called accounting, and then you add the role to the user. Accounting is being added to Bob Smith. If you're using native users, the accounting will actually show up in that drop-down menu. You're going to have reader, publisher, architect, admin, and you're going to have an accounting as that and a list of the roles. Okay? If you're using LDAP, you would need to map that group called Neo4j accounting. Whatever you call the group in LDAP, you're going to give the person to be a member of that LDAP group, and then you're going to map that to the accounting. By doing this, you effectively just created a custom role called accounting. Okay? So this is our way to do custom roles via procedures. So with that, download and try beta. Give us feedback. Neo4j.com, what's new in Neo4j 3.1? You will find this on our website. In future, Emil already mentioned, we're going to improve this subgraph authorization model. We're going to make creating and defining custom roles a little bit more dynamic and interactive. You don't have to do it at a compile time. We're going to add Kerberos support and a couple of other things that we don't talk yet. But that's it. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you very much.